Alright, so this video is going to teach you some of the principles of generic resume design. So what that means is that these are not resumes that are tailored for specific job applications or specific job calls. These are the kinds of resumes that you could hand out at a career fair or something like that, where you've got a bunch of different potential employers. So these are generalizations about how you might set up a resume. I'm going to show you a few different styles of resume here, a few different ways of organizing information, and we'll talk about some of the tools, techniques, and strategies that you can use, things that you want to consider, things that you want to be thinking about as you are setting up your own resume. We'll also talk a little bit about the sections that you want to include and different ways you want to go about structuring this resume or organizing the information on it. So one thing to know is that there are two broad approaches to resume type. There are chronological resumes and there are functional resumes. A chronological resume, actually I'm gonna pull up this. This is a generic sample resume that I've created to apply for a job, and you'll see this again when you watch the video on targeting resumes. But this is a chronological resume. So what it's done is it's organized the information within each section chronologically. So you start with the most recent job or experience or education or whatever it is, and then you work back in reverse chronological order. This is the way that I recommend organizing your resume, because for me this is the safest approach. A skills-based resume, on the other hand, or a functional resume, will organize information by skills or by particular types of experience. So you might have a section on leadership, and then you would organize all of the evidence that you have leadership ability within that section. Again, organizing it in reverse chronological order. The benefit of a functional resume is that it emphasizes skill sets that you have, and so if the employer is primarily looking for people with those skills, that can be a good approach. The other thing, from your perspective as a potential job seeker, is that a functional resume can be a good way of hiding gaps in your work experience or a lack of work experience within the field. The problem with that is that employers also know that, and so sometimes a functional resume is going to throw up red flags for an employer if they say, this person might be trying to hide a lack of experience. So for me, this approach, this chronological approach, where you give us a timeline from most recent to earliest, work experience, leadership, awards, education, whatever it is, for me that's probably the better approach, because it doesn't have that same potential association of trying to hide gaps or a lack of experience. So what do you want within a resume? Well, there's a few key things that you always want. You always want contact information at the top. In 2020, that means you want your name, Rebecca Student being the fake name on this resume. You want an email address and a phone number. Those are absolutely required. Generally, you want a current address. So So current address would be the place that you live right now. So for students who are living away from home, away from your parents' home in most cases, but not all cases, your current address would be where you live at university. So your dorm room, your apartment, whatever it is. Your permanent address would be the place that you live long term. So for university students, this is, again, generally but not always, your parents' address. If that's no longer considered if you're living at your permanent address, so if you're no longer a student or whatever it is, and you just live in your permanent home, then you only need the one address, and you don't need to label it permanent address, because if it's the only address listed, they assume from that it's your permanent address. But really, in 2020, your email address and your phone number are the more important things, because most communication, including in hiring, is now done electronically. It's less and less important to have an address on there, though I would still do it because it is a very traditionally important component. But the email address and the phone number are how they're likely to get in contact with you, more so than by mail. The other two sections, for me, that you absolutely need to have are an education section and a work experience section. The order that you choose to put these in, you'll want to sort of figure that out based on... So for a generic resume, you'll want to decide based on which you think is the more important component. So if you have a university degree, or you're in the process of getting a university degree, I would say start with your education section, and then usually follow that up with work experience. Not always necessarily going to be the best way. So if the field that you're in is a field that's going to value work experience more than education, then flip these. But you want each of these incorporated here. Within the education section, do not include high school if you are in university or you've got a university degree. So if you're in university, in college, only include university level work or college level work. So this person, for instance, is getting a BS in accounting. They're not, Rebecca's student here is not going to include her high school. If she had, say, an associate's degree from somewhere else, that would be listed. If she was in a master's program, she would list her bachelor's and her master's. If we look, this is a version of my curriculum vitae, which is the academic long-form version of a resume. So I've listed my doctorate, my master's, and my bachelor's. And for people with multiple university or college degrees, you want to do that. But you want to leave out high school, because once you're into university, people accept that you have a high school degree, or a GED, or whatever it is. So within the education section, you want to list your degree program and your major. So Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Art, Master's, PhD, whatever it is. You want to list your major, in this case accounting. You want to list the university. You want to list your expected graduation or your graduation date. So that would be when you... So if you haven't yet graduated, that would be when you reasonably expect to complete your program. GPA, you want to make a choice about. If you have a pretty good GPA, list it. If you don't have as solid a GPA, you may choose to leave it off. That's not inherently a bad thing, although sometimes potential employers will notice that the GPA is not listed and they will assume that it's low. So you want to think strategically about that. But it's really up to you. Again, if it's a high GPA or high-ish GPA, I'd say maybe if it's above like a 2.8, something like that. Definitely if it's above a 3, I would say list it. But again, that's a choice that you want to make. Within the work experience section, pieces of information you want to include. The job title. You want to include the name of the company. You want to include the dates that you worked for them. And again, you're organizing this in reverse chronological order. So in this case, Rebecca student got this position in January 2019. So that comes after this August to December 2018 job, and so on and so on. Then, traditionally you want to include the location of the job. That's probably not as crucial anymore as it used to be, but it's still a convention for resume design, and so I would still recommend doing it. And then, for your jobs, you want to include some descriptions of the things that you've done. So, things to think about here. One, you want your descriptions to be things that the reader couldn't easily infer from the job title. So, for instance, Rebecca was a cashier at Grocery Mart. The 2 bullet points here are not necessarily all that important. I mean, if she was a cashier, we can assume that she scanned and bagged groceries, and we can assume that she took money and made change for customers. So, because these 2 lines don't tell us anything about the job that's not already implicit in the job title, these could probably be eliminated to create some more space on this resume. So the other thing that you want to, so that's one thing you want to think about, is make sure that your bullet points are actually giving the reader some useful information. The other thing that you want to think about is starting with verbs. So these bullet points don't need to be full sentences. They can be sentence fragment descriptions. But you want to start as much as possible with verbs, because that tells the reader that you did particular things. So, as a staff accountant, she monitors, she serves, she assists. So each of these bullet points starts with a verb that says, here is a thing that I do. Because remember, employers are going to want you to do things. So that's the way you want to shape your bullet points, is to emphasize doing, emphasize verbs. For any job that you currently hold, you want present tense verbs, so monitor, serve, assist. For any job that you no longer hold, you want past tense, so observed, helped, tallied, these kinds of things. After the education and work experience, there's a lot of different things that you can incorporate. So Rebecca has gone for leadership experience. That's a pretty good choice, because a lot of jobs are going to be looking for people with leadership qualities. I've also seen a lot of people do volunteer experience. I've seen people do like sports. I'm on the fence about that. If the job doesn't have anything to do with sports, I can see where something like captain of a team is a good entry to have in terms of leadership experience. But I would probably frame it that way rather than frame it in terms of like, I want to list all of the years that I played high school soccer or something like that. You can also think about awards, honors, recognition. You can incorporate a section on I blanked on it, but I just had another one. No, I'll come back to it. But you want to set up whatever this sort of next section is, awards and honors, leadership, volunteer experience, whatever it is. You want to set that up in the same way, sort of reverse chronological order. One thing a lot of people recommend is a skills section. And I'm on the fence about skills sections. A lot of professionals do say that they want them. The problem I have with a skills section is that they're not tied to anything in particular. So this is just a list where you claim to be able to do a lot of things with no real sort of evidence, and it's not really tied to anything. It's just, I have this set of skills. So that, for me, is problematic, because one of the things that I want to see in job application materials is evidence for those things. But again, a lot of people that I've seen in terms of hiring in the corporate world have said, yes, a skills section is something we definitely look for, and this should generally be bullet pointed as well. You may want to provide sort of assessments of which skills you're stronger in and which you're weaker in, because that's a good way of sort of letting people know what your greatest strengths are in terms of skills. Some people actually say you should put the skills up at the top so that that's the first thing that readers see. For me, again, I'm not on board with that, just because a skills section is claims without evidence for me. So I don't tend to agree with that, but if that makes more sense to you, that's definitely something that there are people who recommend doing. Another thing that you may consider incorporating into a resume is an objectives section, or a career summary, or something along these lines. This is also one of the things that you want to be strategic about. If you're not if this is an application for a specific job and they're not asking you for a cover letter, something like an objective statement can actually be a really good thing to incorporate. But if you're submitting an application letter, that for me is where you're going to cover the thing that would be covered in less detail in the objective statement or in the summary. So, but the counter position to that, I suppose, is for a generic resume, like something that you would be handing out at a career fair or something like that to a bunch of different employers. The benefit of something like an objective statement is that it tells employers what kind of work you're looking to do in very general terms. And so that's useful, because that can help them figure out whether or not they have that type of work to offer someone. You can also include a summary statement where you give a sense of who you are as a potential employee. And I'm making a video on personal branding, which we'll watch later in this project. The summary statement can be a place to develop your personal brand. You want to focus on the things you want employers to know that make you a unique person who would be good for the job that they're hiring for. So those are the kinds of things that can get incorporated into a resume, and how you want to organize some of them. So we're going to talk now about some of the visual aspects of resume design. So this is a version of the first page of my curriculum vitae. And it's a longer form of a resume, so not all of the stuff that you would normally want on there is on here, but the point of this, the point of looking at these three different versions is to see different setups, different ways of organizing information on the page, more than to look at the actual thing. So some of the things you want to be thinking about are the distribution of information from side to side across the page. You typically want some sort of balance. So you want some information that's going to be flush with the left-hand margin, some information you may want centered, and you want some information flush with the right-hand margin. That's going to create balance. And what we can see across these three different versions of this resume is different degrees of balance. So this is the version that I actually use. This is the version that I actually send out to people. And as you can see, it's got a pretty good balance. I mean, it's got dates consistently along the side here, the right-hand margin here, where most of the other stuff is along the left-hand margin or slightly indented. So it's a pretty well-balanced approach. If we take a look at resume 2, this is a variation, I guess, of what the Smeal College of Business asks their students to do. So if you're in Smeal here at Penn State, chances are this will be the type of resume that they're going to ask you to create. And this is a very balanced approach in terms of left-hand margin, right-hand margin. So we've got a lot of, so the heading, 3 columns, this is a very, very neat setup in terms of current address, permanent address. Again, Smeal assumes that they're working with students, and so the current address, permanent address thing is going to be there. If you're not a student, you're going to have to figure out a different way of organizing this. But then, within the education and the work experience, they have concrete things broken down of what goes at the left-hand margin and what goes at the right-hand margin. So, university name, department, degree, and major on the left-hand margin, the town, the year, year of graduation, and GPA on the right-hand margin. The same kind of thing with work experience. It's divided up with very specific things on the left, very specific things on the right, and then the bullet points more or less left justified. On the third resume, this is actually the least balanced of these. Everything is weighted to the left-hand margin, and so one potentially good thing about that is we get a lot of white space here. We get a lot of white space, which is useful because it's not visually intimidating. And so that's one thing you do want to think about, is how you're incorporating white space into your resume. And so this is, for me, actually one of the potential weaknesses of the Smeal setup, is there's some white space, although I also have 3 degrees, and if you take out, say, the top 2, so for someone who's currently in a bachelor's program, this becomes much less white space. And then work experience tends to have less white space in the center because you tend to have descriptions of the work that you were doing. So Smeal resumes to me often look very heavy and very sort of visually full. Whereas again, this resume, because there's so much white space, because nothing's on the right-hand margin, it's a lot lighter, it's a lot less visually intimidating, but at the same time it's incredibly unbalanced. So I actually don't think this is a particularly good resume approach for that reason. I think if there was a little bit here that was done to like maybe move the dates over to the right hand side just to give it a little more balance, even if we still had a good amount of white space, I think that would actually be a much better approach than what we've currently got here. Other things you want to think about. We have different fonts for each of these resumes. This is Bell MT. I don't remember exactly, but I want to say this is Times New Roman, but I'm not 100% sure. And this, I think, is Calibri. So you want to be thinking about what font you want, but you want a fairly standard font, you want a readable font, you want something that's sized well so that the readers can easily read the information. In terms of highlighting, or in terms of formatting, especially things like section headings, you want to think about ways of creating emphasis, and you want to use them strategically. So I really like small caps, which is this technique here, and I use it for all my headings. Small caps is a technique that I'll actually go back to this one. I'll show you here. So small caps is a technique that, if you're working in this version of Microsoft Word, I'll show you how to do this. You can figure this out in different ways for if you have a Mac or something like that. But the way you set this up is you pull up the expandable tab under the font options, and you just select small caps and click OK. And basically it gives you a cap lock type feature, except that the first anything that you would actually capitalize regularly is a larger capital letter, and anything that would normally be lowercase is a smaller capital letter. So I think it's a really nice technique for headings, but that's my sort of personal opinion. Not everybody is on board with it. Other things you can do: bolding, italicizing. Underlining is a little bit old school, partially because underlining was a technique that people used with typewriters when you couldn't really bold or italicize something. So it is still something that people occasionally do, but I would go for bold or italics to indicate headings or job titles, degree programs, whatever it is. You want to be consistent with this. So you want to make sure that you're always using the same technique for the same type of thing. So every heading, which in this case is bold and caps locked, should be bold and caps locked. You want to make sure that you're doing that consistently. Every job title in this case is bolded. Every employer is listed in italics. So you want consistency to be a major component here. Another thing that we've got on this resume that you can see on the Smeal version is that they use underlining, or they use not underlining, but they use underline borders. So the way you do this, you select the text that you want a border underneath, and then under the paragraph tab here, you've got this little sort of partially filled in square guy, or partially surrounded square guy. So that gives you your borders option, and you can choose all different kinds. But in this case, we want bottom border, and then that puts in a border automatically under the text that you've got highlighted. So that's another really good way of visually breaking sections apart. Another tool that you want to know how to use is setting tab options. This is how you get stuff flush with the right hand margin. Don't attempt to do it by hand, because if you then have to make adjustments, add something, change something, your spacing will get messed up. So you want to do this, you want to set tabs. So let's say I wanted to, I've already got a tab in here, but I'm going to show you how to set another one. So you can use this to put stuff to the left, to the right hand margin, or the center, or anywhere else along the page. So again, if you were going with this Smeal style heading, you had 3 columns. This is a way of creating those 3 columns. So I'll show you how to do that. So you want the ruler to be shown, and if you don't have that showing right now, you can go to View and then just click Ruler, and so that's going to give you this guy and this side guy as well. So what you want to do, just at the very bottom of the actual ruler, just double click. And then if you want to create this right hand margin, you want to select right for the tab stop and click OK. I'm actually going to clear that guy out. So then wherever you clicked, you will have this little thing that says right tab, and you can drag it wherever you want. What you want to do is drag that all the way over to the right hand margin, and then when you press the tab button on your keyboard, it's going to jump all the way over there. And you can insert your text, and it'll type, as you type, it'll move this way from the right hand margin. So that's why you need to select right, because that's what that tells it to do. This aligns the tab to the right of the text, and so everything goes left from there. Now, let's say I wanted to create another one. I wanted to do that 3-column Smeal heading. What I'm going to do then is select center, and I want to put this halfway. Actually, I'm going to tab that back over. I want to put this then halfway across the thing, halfway across the measurement. So wherever that is, and then I can type from there, and it's going to keep the text centered on that tab. So I've now got 3 columns spaced the way that I want them. So that's the way you do that, is just double click right here, make sure to set your alignment left, center, or right, and you can clear them by either selecting an individual tab or whatever it is. So there you go. That's how you do that. So that's a really, really useful tool, because again, you want a lot of stuff flush with the right hand margin, and that's going to help you create that balance. So these are the kinds of things that you want to think about when you're designing your resume, is how you're setting up headings, how you're drawing emphasis to important things within entries themselves, titles of jobs, titles of degree programs, titles of employers, universities, whatever it is, and then how you're spacing things on the page. You want to be thinking about all of those things, and you want to take an approach that looks visually attractive to you. Everyone who designs a resume is going to do it differently. Everyone is going to have different advice, and you definitely do want to consult other people about your resume design choices, because they may make recommendations about how to organize things differently that may work better, but there's no magic approach to resume design, and there's nothing that's inherently better than other versions. And so you want to ultimately go with something that works well for you and something that you think looks good.